Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Helena Tarrant, and we're going to be talking about how she conquered OCD and anxiety. So Helena, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's so funny. I have to say this. It's so funny, the coincidence and stuff. Your first name is pronounced Helena. I graduated from Helena High in Montana.
Oh.
Your last name is Tarrant. I was a Tarrant for 12 years. My two youngest girls are Tarrants. So it's just, I thought it was completely awesome.
Really good coincidence, isn't it?
It is. I thought it was really cool. Helena, let's start out with having you tell us a little bit about your story.
Okay. I grew up in a fairly ordinary way in a suburb of London. My elder brother is severely autistic and he never learned speech. And I have a younger sister. And the autism, I think, caused a lot of tension in the household, probably. And I developed OCD. I don't know why I did. I don't know how it started. I don't know if it had anything to do with my brother's autism or anything to do with anything particular. But by the time I was a child in school, I was having difficulties and I was finding life more difficult than other people. I didn't know why. And I had not heard of OCD and no one had heard of OCD. So I just carried on and struggled on. There was a friend I told about one or two of my strange quirks, and she was very helpful, actually. She didn't know that she was, because neither of us knew what OCD was or that it even existed. But by the time I got to about 27, and I'd been through university and I was working, it was starting to be really debilitating. And I was I had a bit of a meltdown one day with a colleague, and we were working for a mental health clinic, ironically. And I told her how I felt, still didn't know what OCD was. And she said, how long have you been feeling like this? You can get help for this. And so at that point, when I realized it was a problem I could get help with, I sought treatment for it. And I went first to my GP, so a local doctor, who referred me to a place quite locally, which was sort of psychotherapy talking. I realized that wasn't really it wasn't right for me. So I went back and we referred me to the Institute of Psychiatry in London. And there I got very effective cognitive behavioral therapy known as CBT. And that did a lot of, that was really the start of my recovery journey. And it's hard doing CBT, but it was really worth it. So some results started to show up within a couple of weeks. Others took over a year. But it is a recovery journey through life. It's not something where you do a course of therapy and then it's all over and it's all recovered. It's something where you have to hold on to the management techniques for your OCD. You have to be careful that you're not falling back into it. I've had about 3 or 4 quick top-up sessions in group therapy when I've needed them through life. The most recent was about 5 years ago. And after that one, I wrote my book beating OCD and anxiety, which started as an aid memoir for myself. It was really putting a lot of notes together, partly that I'd been reminded of in therapy, some that notes I'd been carrying around in my head, what to do with when OCD started, but I'd never collected them together before. I put a few drawings with them, and I thought this might be helpful to other people, people with OCD and people who are supporting others with OCD, because it's very difficult to live with someone with OCD, depending on how bad it is. So I published the book last year, and that's been doing pretty well and helping a lot of people. So I'm really pleased about that. And it was quite cathartic for me to do that. It sort of, it was quite a therapeutic thing in itself. But now, for many years now, I've had good control over my OCD. And since in the last few years, it's really been getting, I'm very much on top of it now, but it never really goes.
I've never had OCD, so I can't really relate to that. But, I think, for me personally, when I hear the term OCD, I think of people who have to wash their hands constantly, or, they have just these little, I don't want to use the term quirks, but that's really kind of what it is.
Well, that's what I said, but that's what it looks like, probably. Yes.
And maybe that's what it looks like from the outside, but for you, it's you have to do it this way. I couldn't imagine how much of your life that actually controls.
Oh, everything. It's true that washing hands is a common thing with OCD, due to contamination fear, and that's understandably, that's a popular view of it. But there's a lot more. You might have rituals that you have to, like touching things and patting things, going certain ways. You might have rituals in your head as well as ones you do outwardly. You might have to say things over and over again, prayers that you have to say a certain way. A common thing that happened with me is continual checking. So you can't just leave a room, turn the light off, close the door. You have to check the light 6 or 7 times. Leaving the house, leaving the office becomes an impossible task. There was one stage when I was spending about 45 minutes. When I was completely ready to go, it got packed up, got my bag and everything, but it was then another 45 minutes or so because I kept checking and rechecking windows, light switches, coffee machine, whatever else was in the office many times over. You can have intrusive thoughts, these are thoughts which don't really feel connected to you, but which enter your head, which are like, oh, someone's going to die, someone close to me is going to die, or what if this happened or that? And some of these thoughts can be very morbid or very disturbing. And of course, you don't want those thoughts. You try and push them away. And the act of doing that makes them worse. So you have to know how to deal with those. Hypothetical worrying is a big thing with a lot of OCD people. What if worries? What if I do this and something else happens that leads to that? What if I'm a bit late with this bill? What if I've sent the bill, it hasn't gone through properly? I find I'm caught up in the system, I'm arrested, I'm in jail, this sort of big extrapolation of what is really quite a normal problem, not even a problem at all. And catastrophizing as well, thinking that the consequences of something being done or not being done are ginormous, much worse than they actually would be. Contamination fears, worrying that you might have started a harmful chain of events. One of the things with OCD is that you believe that the consequences of your actions are going to be harmful, particularly, of your actions because you failed to do something or not got around to doing something. So I'll give you an example. I used to rent a place. I was staying, so I was a lodger in a place. And when I left the place, it was a while before I got around to changing my address, doing the address redirection of my mail. So the lady in the place where I lived used to get my mail, obviously. And I once thought, oh, no, suppose she picks up my mail, she just puts it on the table, she then goes out, goes to work, and then suppose she's hit by a car on a crossing on the way to work. But it's happened at that second. But if she hadn't picked up the mail that I had been directed to her, which she shouldn't have got, she might have left the house 5 seconds earlier and she wouldn't have got hit. So it's this rather sort of strange, twisted logic that things that you do are going to be harmful. And this is something that happens with people with OCD. They're worried that they're in some way inadvertently, that not them, but their actions are inadvertently harming. They feel a sort of exaggerated responsibility for their actions. That can lead to an awful lot of fear about things. And all this checking and hypothetical worries and fears mean that you're having to ask for reassurance a lot from other people. And that's very sort of undermining of your own self, because you don't want your relationships with other people to be dependent on you saying, oh, is this all right? Did I do that? And it is one of the reasons why it's difficult to live with someone with OCD. So it affects people in a lot of different ways. And it is completely a life-taking over thing. You don't have OC about one thing. You might have it worse about one thing than something else. But it is, if it gets to a stage where it's not been caught early, it really does affect everything you do.
I can imagine. It sounds like it.
It's absolute hell.
Yeah, I was going to say it's.
Like it really is
a nightmare.
Awful thing to have. Yeah.
And I never even thought or realized that having OCD is a lot about the thought patterns and that kind of thing.
Well, one of the things with OCD is that it's completely hidden. Right. People can be operating apparently perfectly normally. You see someone walking down the street, you see them going to work, on the bus, whatever, but they might be having a turmoil of OCD going on that you can't see. It's hidden partly because the symptoms are invisible, of course, and also because people who have it will go to enormous lengths to not let it show. Because if, say, when I, for example, had this ritual where I had to touch, there's a certain gatepost I had to touch 3 times every time as I went past it, because if I didn't, I feared something dreadful would happen. Like my father would die, or a bomb would go off, or because what happens with these rituals is that they start early on, I think, as a sort of comfort thing. I don't know quite why they start. They started with me as I don't even remember when I started them, but I think they start as a sort of safety blanket. And before you realize it, they've become things that you must do to prevent disasters from happening. And the obsession, the behavior that you do drives the obsession further. There's a cycle which CBT works on the principle that emotions, thoughts, and feelings are linked together, and the behaviors that you do to make yourself feel comfortable then lead to reinforcing those thoughts. Because if you've touched the gatepost 3 times, that means everyone's safe, and that's because you touched the gatepost. So you have to touch it. Next time you go past it, you have to touch it again. And the thoughts that the intrusive thoughts and the thoughts you have that start you doing the behaviors in the first place can cause very upsetting feelings. You can feel very desperate, very distressed. You can even feel quite feelings of terror and fear. And the aim of CBT is to break that cycle, which is how it worked. How it worked with me and how it works when CBT is successful. It is, as far as I understand, the most successful treatment for OCD. And it aims to break, you can't do much about your thoughts or your feelings, but you can do something about your behaviors. So as the name implies, cognitive behavioral therapy is about breaking your behaviors, forcing you out of doing these comforting little rituals and thought rituals, And eventually that starts to impact the rest, so that you can gradually stop getting this cycle that you're trapped in, can get less and less until you're not trapped by it.
I would imagine it has to be incredibly lonely living with OCD.
That's a really important point that you've hit on, because it is very lonely, because you can be functioning in as far as it looks, a normal way. But social, you might not go to a social function because you might be worried about something there. You might be worried about the rituals it might suffer, the fears it might cause. But even just when you're with friends or with close family, there's this whole world going on in your head that no one else can understand, that you can't explain really to anybody because it is so bizarre. You don't understand it yourself. You might be a completely rational person. I mean, I am a completely rational person. People with OCD are not crazy or mad. They're not psychotic in any way. So it's very difficult to explain to a group of people around you how you feel and what these feelings are and why you have to do them, because you don't really know yourself. So it is a very lonely thing to have. Yeah. And because no one can see it because it's invisible and it's so hidden. It's not as if someone say, "Oh, Helena, I can see you're having a bad time. Do you want to talk about it, or let me help you take your mind off it?" You can't. You are completely alone with it. That's true.
Well, for those of us on the outside looking in, there's absolutely no way we can understand or comprehend what it is that you're going through. Yeah.
That's right. It's so I write about that, actually. I think in my book, I write about the loneliness of anxiety and OCD, because I link the book is about anxiety as well, because I have generalized anxiety disorder. It's treated in the same sort of way. And it's all about also, well, not all about, but there is a section about the social effects of anxiety and OCD. I mean, I'll give you an example of something like, one example I put in the book is, say that two friends are having a meal. One is not OCD, the other one is OCD. The one with OCD might have all sorts of secret fears. They can't tell the friend about contamination, for example. So when the food arrives, they'll be thinking, "Oh, is this food really okay? Is it cooked properly? Is it, where did it come from?" Now, everyone, of course, has these kind of fears up to a point. It's quite sensible to be concerned about things, where your food comes from. So, but someone with OCD might find that this is completely overwhelming. They can't start the meal, and then they'll have to they can't explain to the friend, so they'll have to try and say something else. They might decide not to eat, or they might just take the bull by the horns and eat, which would be a very good thing to do, because one of the ways you get over OCD is by forcing yourself to do things which make you feel uncomfortable. So that's one example of a social situation. Or you might be at a party and be very, very preoccupied with a worry, a hypothetical worry. Mm-hmm. So you might be effectively engaging, but you might be preoccupied. People might think, "Well, she's a bit sort of not with it." You try not to do that, of course, but it's inevitable that sometimes your mind will be completely elsewhere, not only elsewhere, but you can't just be brought back quickly because you are completely devastatingly worried about something. But it's something no one else could understand. So the effect of social situations, this is why you might think, "Oh, it's just too much trouble to get. It's too overwhelming, the thought of going out or going and seeing someone." If you've got close trusted friends, that's a good thing. People you can tell about it, because they might not understand it. Say we don't understand it ourselves, but you can explain about the rationale of the treatment, for example. If you're having CBT, you can say to the friend in the restaurant, for example, "Now, if I go on about food contamination, just ignore me." And the friend might say, "Fine." And the friend who knows how to sort of deal with it might say, fine, I'm going to eat. Don't eat if you don't want to. I'm fine. I'm going to go on and eat. But they won't sort of make a thing of it. They won't try and reassure you about the food, because reassurance makes things worse, which is one of the very cruel things about OCD. Naturally, if a person sees you in distress and they're close to you, they want to reassure you. It's the natural thing to do. But with OCD, this cycle of thoughts, feelings, behaviors means that the reassurance, unfortunately, just confirms the OCD behavior in the other person. So reassurance is a very natural thing to do, but it doesn't actually help. Having said that, it's not just a question of not reassuring people. Someone who's living with someone with OCD will, of course, know if they're having treatment, they might have talked to the therapist, they might have read something, because OCD doesn't have to be a desperate situation. I mean, lots of people slightly OCD, and they might find it helpful just to read a book like mine, or another book, self-help book, or collection of books that they find interesting, useful tips from, and that might be enough. If it's quite early on, or they're not really very affected, they've had mild OCD for a long time, that might be enough. So you don't need to go madly into one-to-one OCD therapy. There's quite a big spectrum there.
So let's talk a little bit about CBT and how it helps. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about, what does that look like? What exactly does it do?
Yeah. Well, what it does is it breaks the behaviors that drives the rest of the cycle. So, for example, one of the things my therapist said when I was having sessions, because it's very much a question of doing it yourself, and you see the therapist to check how it's going, check your exercise, they give you the exercise, but it's something you have to be on top of all the time. It's not like you have a therapy session and you forget about it until the next week. It's a bit like doing physio or something, where you have to do the exercise all the time. But one of the exercise I had to do, which the physio asked me to do in a session, was, said, right, when you go to, I said, I've got to go to the loo. He said, fine, right, stop, go to the loo. And then after the loo, I want you to wash your hands just 10 times, because one of my fears, again, contamination fear, very common. I've been washing my hands something like 15 times after each time I went to the loo. And this is irrational. It's hard to explain, but there is always a sort of grain of rationality which drives, it's like a hugely exaggerated, hugely distorted form of worry that another person wouldn't have this distortion, someone without OCD. So he said, go and just wash 10 times. So I thought, okay. So I managed to wash my hands, I think just 10 or even 8 times. And I knew that was partly helped by the fact I knew the therapist was waiting for me back in the room. So he said, right, and I want you to practice doing that whenever you go to the bathroom. Just try to reduce the amount of times each time. If you don't get past 8, that's fine, but try not to let it creep up again. If it does, don't worry about it. Don't beat yourself up. Just, try again next time. And the next week, you might manage to get that down to 6 times. And the next time, you might manage to get it down to 4 times until you get it down to the normal once. So a lot of CBT is very much this. It's called exposure and response prevention. In other words, you are preventing from doing your natural response, not your OCD response, and you simply have to do it again and again and again with whatever problems are. And it's very, very difficult, because in your mind, something awful is going to happen if you don't wash your hands 10 times. You're going to accidentally contaminate someone, and they might get cancer and they might die. And I know that everyone knows cancer is not caused in that way. It's not contagious. But this is where there's that you're a perfectly rational person operating in a perfectly rational way. But I sometimes describe it using the image of a fly and a microscope. If you see a fly, if you look through a microscope at a fly, you'll see this enormous, great, really quite scary creature with this sort of big stringy wings and hairy legs and huge eyes. And that's all you can see. if you're looking through a microscope. When you don't have OCD, or when you recover from OCD, it's like you're looking away from that microscope and you see the fly for what it is. It's just a tiny thing buzzing around the room that you can squash, or you don't, otherwise it doesn't have to bother you. But when you have OCD, it's a bit like there's some grain of rationality, some grain of worry, but it doesn't stop there. It swells and swells until it's like the fly through the microscope. So that is all you can see. You know there's the rational world out there just behind that. You know what you're thinking is not logical, but it's this enormous exaggeration of a worry that someone else who doesn't have OCD wouldn't even think about. So the CBT is trying to, in various ways, to sort of correct this distortion. One of them is ERP. One of them might be, for example, apart from stopping doing rituals or washing and things like that, you might have to think about things like why you do. There's a slightly more philosophical element to it as to why do you feel you, what are your worry beliefs? These are called in my latest therapy. The therapist said, perhaps you're looking for things to worry about. And I thought, how can, and I felt really indignant because I thought, well, I've been fighting this thing all my life. I've been therapy, years ago. How can you say I'm looking for things to worry about?
Right.
In fact, he was right, because there are what he called worry beliefs, and like things that might be behind your worries. They don't cure your worries if you discover what they are, but it does help you to understand the condition a bit more, and it does help you take a bit more control of it. One of my worry beliefs I discovered was I felt I should have a harder time than other people. I didn't deserve to have a nice, easy life. Now, I've no idea why I have that worry, that belief, where it came from. I don't have it now, but it was one of the things that was holding me back. That the OCD was a way of sort of keeping myself in this this belief. And again, OCD does not come about because of these sorts of worry beliefs, but they certainly help to fuel it. So CBT is various things, but it always makes you feel is really great when you realize when your OCD is starting to improve, and that happens within quite a short time, but it's hard to do it. If I come back to the example of physio exercises, they might be hard to do. You might have to put yourself through pain to cure your bad hip or whatever it is, or make your legs stronger or whatever. And CBT is a bit like that. You have to force yourself out of your comfort zone. You have to force yourself to do things which you believe will be a disaster. But then, of course, if you can get through that, the second time you do it, that belief does not have quite such a grip. And then the time you do it after that is a little weaker still. And sometimes it goes, you feel you've gone back to the beginning and you just as worried, you can't do it. But it's an up and down thing. Recovery is not linear. It's not one nice smooth slope that is going. So there's certainly times when you might feel discouraged, but you just have to carry on with what you can. And normally you find that I found that if I'd failed with something in an OCD, a CBT exercise, it came back much quicker than it did at the start. So it is uphill, but you get dips in it. But CBT is a difficult thing. It can only really be done if you're really determined to conquer OCD, because it's quite difficult to do. Having said that, I think it's it certainly worked for me. And not all people need to do all these uncomfortable exercises. Say you might just find that you need to stop yourself turning off a light switch 3 times, 4 times, but your worries are not that drastic. It could just be, if you're in mild stage or it's never really got really bad, then you just need to read a book or watch a program or watch something online to learn how to deal with it. There's certain charities that deal with OCD, give very good tips, and talk forums and things like that. So CBT is sort of different, but the essence of it is breaking your OCD behaviors to break the cycle that you're trapped in.
Well, I mean, it's fascinating. I love CBT. I'm a CBT coach practitioner.
Various things, yeah.
So you can use it for so many different things. Well,
Yeah.
Helena, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. We're coming up at the end of our time. How can our listeners find you online?
Right. Well, my website is helenacartoonist.com. So it's HELENA cartoonist, all one word, .com. There's my email, Instagram and things on there. I also have quite a young YouTube channel. I'm on Instagram under the OCD cartoonist. So any of those ways, I can be contacted through any of those.
Fantastic. Thank you. And listeners, you know the drill. I will have all of Helena's contact information, the link to her book, everything down in the show notes. Just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com if you're listening from one of our partner stations. Pull up Helena's show.
My book's on there as well. I forgot to say that stuff.
Great. Yeah, just head over to the website, pull up Helena's show, and all her contact information will be there for you. Well, Helena, thank you again for coming on and talking with us today. This has been incredibly fascinating.
Tracy. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. And listeners, thank you as always for listening and tuning in, and we'll talk to you in the next show.